Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters temporary studio. Welcome to the show. So on today's episode, I'm going to take you through my power rankings for Phyrexia All Will Be One, and that also includes the Phyrexia All Will Be One pre-con commanders as well. So yeah, on this episode, I'm going to take you from the D tier, which is the, well, let's just say least powerful commanders from the set and the pre-cons, up to the C tier, then the B tier, then the A, and all the way up to the S tier, which is the most powerful commanders from the set and pre-cons. Now, a couple of things. First up, yeah, this is a completely subjective episode. This is 100% based off of my own opinions, and your opinions might differ on these tiers and the rankings, and that's okay. Also, these rankings are done within the vacuum of Phyrexia All Will Be One, which basically means that these are the commanders in the set and the pre-cons in comparison to each other and how powerful they are, and not compared to commanders outside the set or these pre-cons. So a commander from this set might be an S tier commander here, but it might not be an S tier commander in, say, another set. So with all that said, well, blame Eddie in the comments below if you don't like my rankings, and of course, let's jump into it. So first up, starting off in the lowest tier with the D tier, we've got Malcator Purity Overseer, a 1/1 Phyrexian Elf Wizard that costs 1 white blue, and it says, when it enters the battlefield, create 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Golem artifact creature token. And the beginning of your end step, if 3 or more artifacts enter the battlefield under your control this turn, create a 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Golem artifact creature token. So for an ETB, yeah, that is not all that bad. That's, that's okay. Hey, every single time this ETBs, and you've got some different ways that you can blink it, you're making a 3/3. Now, that is a vanilla 3/3, no extra keywords on that, and the same thing with the end step trigger. 3 artifacts coming into play is a decent amount. Now, keep in mind that does count, tokens as well. So if you're making treasures or other artifact creatures, etc., sure, you can make some more Phyrexian Golems. But outside of just making a couple of Phyrexian Golems throughout the game, there really isn't much to this commander. So yeah, there's a lot of very powerful commanders in this set in the pre-con. So Malcator, you unfortunately are a D tier commander in comparison to them. Next up, we've got Ruck Hexgold Nabber, a 2/2 Goblin Rebel with Trample and Haste that costs 2 in red that says, whenever an equipped creature you control other than Ruck Hexgold Nabber attacks or dies, you may attach all equipment attached to that creature to Ruck. Now, yes, you can build up a lot of equipment on other creatures, but when you're doing that, all you're doing essentially is just hoping that that creature dies or finding a way for it to die so that you can then move it on to Ruck. There are certain creatures that can benefit from this, that you can equip things to for free potentially or to reduce cost. But still, at the end of the day, you're making a Voltron commander deck with this commander that just has Trample and Haste. That's not bad, but also, there are definitely more powerful things out there. And yeah, a mono red Voltron commander that has, kind of a unique way to get equipment on it isn't just, up to snuff in comparison to some other commanders from this set. So Ruck, unfortunately, you are a D tier commander. Moving on, another mono-red commander with Slowbad Iron Goblin, a 3/3 Phyrexian Goblin Artificer for 2 in a red. Tap, sacrifice an artifact, add an amount of red equal to the sacrifice artifact's mana value. Spend this mana only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. So, I think without that last restriction, this one could probably be pushed up A tier. With that restriction, though, yes, there are still some good things that you can do with this, obviously. Get some artifacts into play, especially ones that actually want to be sacrificed. Sacrifice them, get mana from this, and yeah, utilize that mana to cast more artifacts or activate artifact abilities. Again, with that restriction, and also kind of without this having haste that you can actually get value out of it right away, there really isn't much to this commander when it comes to that. There are certain cool plays that you can make, obviously, but in comparison to other commanders from this set in the pre-cons, yeah, Slowbad just isn't up to the job of being more than, well, a D tier commander. But now let's move on to a mono green commander with Run Breaker of Silence, a 5/5 Troll Shaman that costs 3 green. It can't be countered, it's got Trample, it can't be the target of non-green spells your opponents control or abilities from non-green sources your opponents control, and as long as it's your turn, the run has Indestructible. So yeah, this has the makings of a Voltron commander. That being said, it is still a mono-colored commander, so you are limited on what cards you can utilize with it, and also, Yeah, again, in comparison to other commanders from this set, a mono-colored Voltron commander, even though it does have some potential and a good amount going for it, again, some protection from most spells or abilities, except for green ones, trample so it can get damage through, indestructibility on your turn, it just isn't quite there to even make it to the C tier. So again, Thrun Breaker of Silence, you are solidly a D tier commander. Next up, how about Kemba Ka Enduring, a 2/2 cat cleric for 1 and a white that says whenever it or other cat enters the battlefield under your control, attach up to 1 target equipment you control to that creature. Equipped creatures you control get +1/+1, and by paying 3 white, create a 2/2 white cat creature token. Now, this commander does have the potential for some early KOs. Like I said on the episode around this commander, hey, yeah, I mean, if you get out certain equipment, you can attach right away, and you can hit really hard really quickly. That being said, again, this is a Voltron-style commander. This is a mono-colored commander. Mono-white is still, in my opinion, the weakest out of all the colors. And yeah, I mean, outside of those very early plays that can be very flashy and very fun, there are definitely going to be times where things don't work out in that way. And sure, you can take this cat tribal as well, but there are just more powerful commanders from this set and the precon. So Kemba, you are a D-tier commander. Next up, another D-tier commander. We've got Malira, the Living Cure, a 3/3 human scout for green-white that says if you would get 1 or more poison counters, instead you get 1 poison counter and you can't get additional poison counters this turn. Also, exile Malira, the Living Cure, choose another target creature or artifact. When it's put into a graveyard this turn, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Now, that first part, sure, is handy if you're playing against, poison decks, infect decks, toxic decks, whatever we're calling them these days. But aside from that, yeah, that ability can be quite powerful, but it is a one-off ability. If it was one that instead of saying, exile, if it said sacrifice, you could definitely utilize it more in a lot more powerful and some pretty broken ways. That being said, because you're exiling Malira, there's not really many ways to actually get around, having to actually recast Malira from the command zone and paying that commander tax again and again and again. So because of that, Malira, you are a D-tier commander. Joining you in the D tier, though, is Miglaz Maze Crusher, a 4/4 Phyrexian beast for 1 red-green that says it enters battlefield 5 oil counters on it. By paying 1, you can remove an oil counter from it. It gains Vigilance and Menace until end of turn. By paying 2, you can remove 2 oil counters from it. It gets +2/+2 until end of turn. And by paying 3, you can remove 3 oil counters from it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. So this is somewhat of a toolbox commander that can be utilized in a couple of different ways. Obviously, it can hit pretty hard. It can, have some vigilance and menace, so it can help out in combat. And also, you can utilize it to take out pesky artifacts and enchantments. That being said, you need to keep the oil counter supply on this going through effects like proliferating or ways to get it back into play. And yes, it is going to be decently mana intensive to utilize it to the fullest. It does have some potential, but it does require some setup. And yeah, in comparison to other commanders from this set in the precons, it's just not quite up to snuff. So Miglaz, you are a D-tier commander. Next up, how about Glissa Sun Slayer, a 3/3 Phyrexian zombie elf with First Strike and Death Touch that costs 1 black and a green. Whenever Glissa Sun Slayer deals combination to a player, choose 1, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Destroy target enchantment or remove up to 3 counters from target permanent. So this one does have some interesting things that it can do. First up, it is, First Strike and Death Touch, meaning that it is very hard to take out in combat. Still doable, but very hard to take out. And it also means that, well, it is not unblockable. Your opponents are going to be hesitant to block it. So you are going to be able to get through sometimes to ensure that you can get some of those effects. That being said, the effects are decent, not all that great. You can, yes, draw some cards with it. You could destroy some enchantments, not artifacts, unfortunately. And generally, that last part is going to be the least applicable most of the time. Though, if you're going up against Super Friends, that could be pretty helpful. That being said, at the end of the day, there are just other commanders out there that outclass this, and very few opportunities to really take advantage of that trigger, again, with these colors. Not many double striking effects that you can utilize with this. So, Glissa Sunslayer, overall, you're a D-tier commander. And finally, rounding out our lowest tier, the D tier, we've got Jorkadine, First Gold Warden, a 2/2 human rebel with trample that costs red-white, and it says, whenever it attacks, it gets +X/+X until I determine X the number of equipped creatures you control. Then if Jorkadine's power is 4 or greater, draw a card. So, in somewhat of a weird way, this commander really incentivizes you to kind of have it be a Voltron commander, but also kind of go wide with a lot of equipment, with a lot of different creatures that are equipped. So it's kind of pulling in two different directions, neither of which are all that effective. So yes, overall, this is an interesting commander, one that can give you some card advantage throughout the game, but also one that is pretty lackluster in comparison to other commanders from the set in the pre-con. So Jorkadeen, you are rounding out our D tier. So now let's move one step up to the C tier, not quite middle of the road commanders, but better than the D tier commanders. And we're going to start things off with Karumonix, the Rat King, a 3/3 Phyrexian rat with Toxic 1 that costs 1 black, and it also says, other rats you control have Toxic 1, and on top of that, when it enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal any number of rat cards from among them, put the real cards in your hand, put the rest of the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is a rat tribal commander that gives Toxic to all your rats, and Toxic can be quite potent. Now, not quite as potent as Infect, because it's basically just limiting to, especially with this, Toxic 1 is limiting to 1 poison counter, no matter the amount of damage that rat does. That being said, there are some decent rats out there, and if you go wide enough, you are able to dish out enough poison damage, and also if you're able to utilize proliferate effects as well to take your opponents out effectively. That being said, again, you are limited to a monocolored deck. So overall, Karumonix, definitely not in the worst tier, but definitely not in the best either. You are a C tier commander. Joining you in the C tier, though, is another one of your toxic friends with Skrelv Defector Might, a 1/1 Phyrexian Might with Toxic 1 that costs a single white mana. Skrelv cannot block, and also by paying a Phyrexian White and tapping, choose a color. Another target creature you control gains Toxic 1 and Hexproof from that color until end of turn. It can't be blocked by creatures of that color this turn. So, early on, of course, you can get this commander down turn 1 and start getting more and more poison counters on your opponents. Then, essentially, this becomes basically a Mother of Runes in a way, but also applying Toxic. So, this is a way to help get the creature through and also protect a creature while also giving it Toxic. So, you can really take advantage of that with things like double striking creatures or evasive creatures that can already get through on opponents. So, overall, an interesting commander, though it is still a mono-white commander, and that does hamper it quite a bit. So, Skrelv, you are a C tier commander. Next up, yet another toxic commander with Venser Corpse Puppet, a 1/3 Phyrexian zombie wizard with lifelink and Toxic 1 that costs blue, black, and it says, whenever you proliferate, choose 1. If you don't control a creature named the Hollow Sentinel, create the Hollow Sentinel, a legendary 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Golem artifact creature token, and target artifact creature you control gains flying and lifelink until end of turn. So, this commander does have access to more colors. It is not inherently evasive itself, but it does have a way to give it some evasion by actually, proliferating and making it so that it has flying as well as lifelink. Or you can use another creature that might, want to get through, perhaps another one of Toxic or Infect to give them flying and lifelink as well when you proliferate. So this commander benefits you when you proliferate. That being said, its effects really aren't all that impressive. If the 3/3 Golem, had Toxic 2 or something like that, that would be different. But unfortunately, no, it's just a vanilla legendary Phyrexian Golem. Sure, you can give it flying and lifelink, but you'd rather, apply Toxic to something. You'd rather get some more poison counters on an opponent. Overall, pretty lackluster in comparison to some of the other commanders from this set. Definitely not the worst, definitely not the best. Venser, you are a C tier commander. Moving on, we've got Geth Thane of Contracts, a 3/4 Phyrexian zombie that costs 1 black, and it says other creatures you control get -1/-1 by paying 1 black. Tap, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains if this creature would leave the battlefield, exile instead of putting it anywhere else, activate only as a sorcery. So, this commander does hamper your team slightly with that negative anthem, though there are some ways to potentially take advantage of that. That being said, an effective build around this commander is most likely a Reanimator style build, where you're looking to get creatures into your graveyard, whether you're tutoring for them and putting them directly in your graveyard, or by milling yourself, or by discarding them, and then getting them out for cheap. Again, just 3 mana. That being said, you are not able to get that creature out essentially more than once, because if it's going to leave the battlefield, it's exiled instead of going anywhere else, so you are not able to get it back. Not a bad commander by any means, a decent commander, one that is limited somewhat by its color identity, but also limited by that activation only as a sorcery. So overall, Geth, you are a C tier commander. Next up, we've got Kinzu of the Bleak Coven, another mono black commander, a 5/4 flying Phyrexian vampire that costs 4 and a black, and it says, whenever their non-token creature you control dies, you may pay 2 life and exile it. If you do, create a token that's copy of that creature, except it's 1/1 and has Toxic 1. So this commander is somewhat like a Nightmare Shepherd in a way. Basically, replace your creatures with token copies of them that are 1/1s, but also have Toxic 1. So there's some decent things that you can do with this. You can definitely take advantage of ETBs as well as death triggers, because that exiling does not replace the creature dying, so you get the death trigger as well. So yeah, you can really play around with those, but also play around with giving that creature Toxic 1. So maybe you can utilize some evasive creatures, potentially some creatures that have ways to get that Toxic 1 applied in a more effective way. Perhaps by taking advantage of a creature that is Infect as well as now Toxic 1 too. So yes, there are some interesting things that you can do with this commander. There are definitely some powerful moves that you can utilize with it. That being said, again, limited to just one color, an interesting effect, not overpowered. So overall, Kinzu, you are a C tier commander. Next up, yet another mono black commander joins the C tier with Ran, Executioner Thane, a 2/2 Phyrexian vampire for 1 and a black that says, whenever one or more other creatures you control die, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. This ability triggers only once each turn. So this is somewhat like a Zulport Cutthroat in your command zone in a way, though again, that last sentence, this ability triggers only once each turn, is a massive limitation. So you are basically incentivized to be sacrificing creatures on every single turn, and most likely just sacrificing a singular creature on every single turn to really take advantage of this and to make the most out of your creature fodder, because if you are sacrificing more than one creature in a turn, you're not getting any more value out of this. That being said, if you've got a free sacrifice outlet to take advantage of and a couple of pieces of creature fodder with 1 trip around the table, you can drain all your opponent's 8 and gain 8. So yes, the potential is there for this, though again with that limitation, it does knock it down to the C tier. Moving on, we've got Rhea Ivor, Bane of Bladehold, a 3/4 Phyrexia Knight that costs 2 white, black, and it has Battle Cry. At the beginning of combat on your turn, the next time target creature would deal combat damage to 1 or more players this combat, prevent that damage. If damage prevented this way, create that many 1/1 colorless Phyrexia Might artifact creature tokens with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. Now, this is an interesting commander. It has a very unique effect. That being said, you are sacrificing damage to actually make the most out of this commander by making, a bunch of creature tokens potentially with it that may or may not be able to get through on your opponents. Also, Battle Cry is an interesting thing to have on this commander as well. By pumping your creature's power, yes, it makes them hit harder, but with those Phyrexian Mites and their Toxic 1, it's not going to help apply any more poison. If that was, say, something like Double Strike instead, where, hey, when this attacks, your creatures get Double Strike, that would be a different story. Nonetheless, that is not the case, so Rhea Ivor, you have found yourself in the C tier. Moving on, another C tier commander, we've got Othari Sun's Glory, a 3/3 Phoenix with Flying, Lifelink, and Haste that costs 3 red, white, and has, whenever it attacks, you get an experience counter, then create a 2/2 red Rebel creature token that's tapped and attacking for each experience counter you have. And also, pay 2 red, white, tap an untapped Rebel you control, return Othari from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So, this commander, interestingly enough, does have a way to get around commander tax. That being said, it can be somewhat of an interesting and risky way because, well, yes, this commander can make rebels, but if those rebels are dealt with and you were counting on getting your commander back from your graveyard with a rebel, and you've got no other rebels in the deck, then your commander is kind of stuck. So yes, it definitely has that interesting way of getting it back. That being said, this attack trigger can be quite powerful, especially if you can get more and more experience counters. And yeah, there are different ways to do that with proliferating and such. It does take a while to build up. That being said, yes, once you've got things set up, you can definitely hit hard with this one. Overall, in my opinion, a C tier commander. Moving on, we've got Chisgoria, Forged Tyrant, a 5/4 flying hasty dragon with affinity for artifacts that costs 6 red, red, red. And whenever it attacks, exile the top 5 cards of your library. You may cast an artifact spell from among them this turn. If you do, it has affinity for artifacts. So this is a commander that might have a very high converted mana cost, but you can actually cast it for a lot less. In fact, down to just 3 mana, even including, commander attacks at times, depending on how many artifacts you have in play. Now, you are dependent on having a lot of artifacts in play, so if they get wiped, you might be in trouble. That being said, you can build up artifacts quite quickly with this while attacking, especially if you've got additional combats, etc., etc. So yeah, you can definitely get some artifacts into play, a lot of powerful artifacts into play pretty quickly and cheaply or even freely with this on attack. This has a good amount of potential. Again, you are limited to mono red and are dependent on having a board that is healthy with artifacts. That being said, overall, in my opinion, Chisgoria, you are a C tier commander. And joining you in the C tier is another commander with a pretty high converted mana cost with Graz Unstoppable Juggernaut, a 7/5 Juggernaut that costs 8 and says Juggernauts you control attack each combat of Fable. Juggernauts you control can't be blocked by walls, and other creatures you control have base power count is 5/3 under Juggernauts in addition to their other creature types. So this is a commander that can be a big splashy play when you bring it into play if you are set up properly. If you get a good amount of creatures, especially a lot of low to the ground creature tokens into play, which you can make quite quickly, those creatures can become a lot more powerful. Again, basically a +4/+2 to all your little 1/1s. Now, there is somewhat of a downside that you cannot, unless your creatures have vigilance, keep your creatures back for blocking. So there is that downside to this. There's a slight upside against very specific decks that your creatures are basically unblockable, against an Arcades the Strategist deck. That really doesn't move the needle, though, for this commander. And yeah, overall, Graz, a very interesting commander, but one that is, in comparison to other commanders from this set in the precons, a C tier commander. And finally, rounding up the C tier, we've got Urtet, Remnant of Memnarch, a 2/2 Legendary Artifact creature mirror that costs 3 and says, whenever you cast a mirror spell, create a 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature token. At the beginning of combat, on your turn, untap each mirror you control, and by paying Wooburg and tapping, put 3/+1 counters on each mirror you control, activate only during your turn. So, this is a commander that is definitely one that many players out there are excited for. Mirror Tribal is finally here. It can do some interesting things. That being said, currently the support for Mirror Tribal really isn't there in comparison to many other tribes out there. There are only so many Mirror out there, and yes, this makes the most of them. Again, giving you more and more Mirror when you cast Mirror creatures, and also untapping them during combat, so you can really take advantage of actually, mirrors that tap for different effects, and of course, making them even larger with that last ability. That being said, overall, even though it's a 5-color commander, it is outclassed by many other commanders in this set in the precon. So Urtet, you are the last C tier commander. But now let's move on to those middle-of-the-road commanders with the B tier, starting off with Ixel, Scion of Atraxa, a 2/5 Phyrexian Angel with Flying, Vigilance, and Toxic 2 that costs 1 white, black, green, and has Corrupted. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent who has 3 or more poison counters exile the top card of their library face down. You may look at and play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So, again, we see that toxic mechanic on this time with Toxic 2. Of course, 2 poison counters can be quite deadly. Again, this just takes 5 hits to 1 player for them to be taken out. Or, and yes, you do have access to white, so you've got access to plenty of ways to give this double strike. This could just be, essentially a 3-shot KO on many opponents by giving it double strike, basically giving it toxic 4 inherently. On top of that, you have access to a lot of proliferate effects, so this can go even quicker, and also with that, you can easily meet that corrupted requirement for basically all players quite quickly with this, and by doing so, you get access to a lot of card advantage. So overall, Ixel, you are an interesting design, and in my opinion, a B tier commander. Moving on, another toxic commander with Vishgraz, the Doomhive, a 3/3 Phyrexian insect with Menace and Toxic 1 that costs 2 white, black, green, and has, whenever it enters the battlefield, create 3 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature tokens with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. On top of that, Vishgraz is going to get ++1 for each poison counter your opponents have. So that is a pretty powerful ETB, making 3 creature tokens that can be quite deadly every single time this comes into play. And yeah, since you have access to white, you've got plenty of ways to blink this. Since you have access to black, you've got plenty of ways to utilize Feign Death type effects to get it right back when it dies. So you can make an army quite quickly with this and get a lot of proliferate effects in there as well to take your opponents out quite quickly. Also, on top of that, you're actually encouraged to take your opponents out as a group, because the more and more poison counters that your opponents have, the larger this can become, and this can easily become a 2-shot, if not a 1-shot KO, especially if with, double strike effects as well. So overall, Vishgraz, pretty powerful. Not as powerful, as some of the other commanders that we're going to get to here in a bit in the A and the S tier. But yeah, Vishgraz, you are a solid B tier commander. And joining the B tier, we've got Azuri, Stalker of Spheres, a 3/3 Phyrexian Elf Warrior that costs 2 green, blue, and has, when enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 if you do proliferate twice. Also, on top of that, when you proliferate, you draw a card. So, yeah, this can be an absurd amount of card draw. You're going to benefit even further from your proliferate effects, drawing a lot of cards in the process. Again, basically on that ETB, paying 3, drawing 2, plus the other benefits. It's kind of like a divination every single time. Plus those advantages that you're gaining on getting more counters on your creatures, potentially getting more -1/-1 counters on your opponent's creatures, or, you know, more loyalty counters on planeswalkers, more poison counters on your opponents, all the lovely benefits of proliferating. Yeah, there's a lot you can do with this commander. You've got some blink effects that you can take advantage of well thanks to that blue, so you can really take advantage of that ETB. And there are certain things that you can get charge counters on to get even more mana out of them. Yeah, this commander's got a good amount of potential. Still, not enough potential to make it into the A tier though, so Azuri, you are a B tier commander. Moving on, we've got Kethic Crucible Goliath, a 4/4 Phyrexian beast that costs 2 black-red that says, if you give your end step, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do reveal cards from the top of your library to reveal a non-legendary creature card with lesser mana value, put it on the battlefield, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is a commander that can really take advantage of sacrificing creatures, potentially creatures that you might be able to sneak into play in different ways or utilize, you know, through some reanimate effects. I mean, like a sneak attack to get something massive into play can be great. So you not only can attack with that creature right away, but also at your end step, sacrifice that creature for value to get something else potentially massive in play as well. Also, because you cannot hit legendary creatures, you can take advantage of that in some ways as well. So yeah, this commander can take advantage of ETBs, LTBs, can sneak out some big creatures in some really cool ways. So Kethic, overall, a solid commander, a B tier commander. Moving on, we've got Naali Sun's Vanguard, a 3/3 human rebel that costs 2 red/white that says attacking tokens you control have double strike, and whenever one or more tokens you control attack a player, exile the top card of your library. During any turn you attack with a token, you may play that card. So first up, giving your attack and tokens double strike is actually an incredible thing. Even if you've got low to the ground tokens, there are a lot of great anthem effects or pump effects in these colors, so you can have those tokens hit hard. And of course, there are ways to make even, you know, just potentially temporary tokens of other creatures as well, so you can take advantage of that too. On top of that, of course, that Impulse Draw, kind of Impulse Draw plus actually, because you get to keep those cards in exile, and during any turn you attack with a token, which can be quite often, you can play that card. So you kind of like have a separate hand as well with this. So yeah, overall, this commander is pretty solid. Definitely not in the top tiers, but definitely a solid B tier commander. But now let's round out the B tier with Ovika Enigma Goliath, a 6/6 flying ward 3 pay 3 life Phyrexian Nightmare that costs 5 blue/red that has, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create X 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens, Rex the mana value of that spell to gain haste until end of turn. So this is a, well, nightmare commander, obviously, for many reasons. It is a heavy hitter that is hard to deal with, and on top of that, it has an incredible trigger that can really take your opponents out quite quickly once it's in play. Of course, the main downside of the main thing holding this back is that it is a 7 mana commander. If this instead, say, was a lot lower, maybe like a 4 mana commander that was a lot smaller, maybe didn't have that ward 3 pay 3 life, maybe it was just, you know, a 4/4 flyer or even a 3/3 flyer, but had that exact same effect, this would definitely finish above where it's at right now. But because of that massive mana cost, overall, Ovika, you are a B tier commander. Now let's move up to the A tier though, those commanders that are incredibly powerful, but not quite up to that S tier, not quite to the top tier. We're going to start things off with Elesh Norn, Mother of Machines, a 4/7 Phyrexian Praetor with Vigilance that costs 4 and a white. If a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers initial time. Also, permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities of permanents your opponent's control to trigger. This is an incredibly powerful commander, one that can double up on every single one of your ETBs. So yeah, basically a Panharmonicon commander, which also kind of comes with a Torpor Orb just for you on it that affects your opponents. So yes, this commander is very powerful. It is, however, limited to mono white, and actually, even if it wasn't just mono white, I'm not sure if it would make it out of this tier because the S tier commander is incredibly powerful, and we'll get to that here in a bit. But yeah, Elesh Norn should not be underestimated. That being said, Elesh Norn, you are an A tier commander. Joining Elesh Norn in the A tier, though, is Tecuthal Inquiry Dominus, a 3/5 Phyrexian horror that has flying, that costs 2 blue, and says if you proliferate twice instead. And on top of that, pay 1 Phyrexian blue, move 3 counters from among other artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers you control. Get an indestructible counter on Tecuthal Inquiry Dominus. So, yeah, doubling up your proliferating effects can be incredibly powerful. I mean, not just for poison counters on your opponents, but also +1 counters on your creatures, -1/-1 counters your opponent's creatures, etc., etc., etc. You can even double up on that indestructible counter and get more and more on this, and you've got some ways that you can distribute that as well to other permanents. That being said, yes, this is a great effect in a commander that can be really hard to deal with, but in comparison to the S tier, it's not quite there, and again, shortly, you will see why. So, Teklithal and Inquiry Dominus, you are an A tier commander. Joining you in the A tier, though, is Zapandrel Hunger Dominus, a 4/6 Phyrexian Horror with reach that costs 5 green and says, at the beginning of each combat, double the power toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. By paying Phyrexian green, and sacrificing 2 other creatures, you get an indestructible counter on Zapandrel Hunger Dominus. So, yes, this one does have a very high converted mana cost, but unlike Ovika, this one can have an immediate impact and be a game-winning play in and of itself, doubling your creature's power toughness during combat. Also, this one is even harder to deal with in that you can just immediately activate that basically for free, I mean at the cost of 4 life and sacrificing 2 creatures, to make this very hard to deal with, nearly impossible in certain circumstances, and yeah, being able to ensure that you can have this force in play that can make your creatures twice as deadly. Yeah, this is definitely, in my opinion, an A tier commander, but again, not quite to the S tier. And you might start seeing a pattern here because we've got yet another Dominus joining the fray. At the A tier, we've got Sulfim Mayhem Dominus, a 5/4 Phyrexian Horror that costs 2 red, and says, if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent opponent controls, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. And by paying 1 Phyrexian red, discard 2 cards, you get an indestructible counter on this. So again, quite easy to get that indestructible counter on this to make it really hard to deal with in a way to double up all of your non-combat damage to all your opponents and their permanents. So yeah, this can really speed things up, especially with a group slug style strategy. You can really dish out the pain and ensure that your opponents are getting taken out very quickly. That being said again, and I'm going to keep saying it, yes, very powerful, definitely A tier worthy, but not quite up to the S tier, especially in comparison to the one from this set. So Sulfim, congratulations on making to the A tier. And of course, yet another Dominus is joining us with Mondrak Glory Dominus, a 4/4 Phyrexian Horror that costs 2 white, and says, if one or more tokens be created under control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead, and by paying 1 Phyrexian white, sacrifice 2 other artifacts and or creatures, you get an indestructible counter on Mondrak. Now, this is basically an annoying procession on a commander that, again, is very hard to deal with. So doubling up your tokens is a very powerful thing. And yes, you can have some really big splashy plays. This does not exclude, non-creature tokens, essentially. Again, you can double up your treasures and other tokens like, food, clues, blood, etc., etc., etc. That being said, as I keep saying it, very powerful commander, very powerful effect, very hard to deal with, not quite to the S tier. So again, Mondrak Glory Dominus, congratulations on making it to the A tier. And our final Dominus is here with Drivnod Carnage Dominus, an 8/3 Phyrexian Horror that costs 3 black, and it says, if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. On top of that, by paying Phyrexian black, exile 3 creature cards from your graveyard, put an indestructible counter on Drivnod. So again, quite easy to make this indestructible. It's a really heavy hitter. Again, a 3-shot KO already on any opponent. Obviously, if you grant this double strike or whatever else, essentially, you can ensure that this is even quicker to take your opponents out. And of course, speaking of quick, yeah, this is definitely an aristocrat-style commander that can double up on death triggers, much like a Teysa Karlov. Very effective, very powerful, very much, again, in the A tier, because the S tier is just out of its reach. So again, Drivnod, congratulations on making it to the A tier. And wrapping up our A tier commanders, we've got Atraxa Grand Unifier, a 7/7 Phyrexian Angel with Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink that costs 3 green, white, blue, black. And of course, on top of that, when it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each card type, you may put a card of that type from among the real cards in your hand. For the rest of your library in a random order. And of course, that includes artifacts, battle, creature, enchantment, instant, land, planeswalker, and sorcery. And actually, battle, I should mention, is a brand new card type, apparently. But yes, with this ETB, you can potentially gain up to 8 cards in your hand just on an ETB. Essentially, more than drawing 7, more than drawing a new hand, you can gain up to 8 cards and get them directly in your hand just on an ETB, not off a cast trigger, so you can easily abuse this by blanking it, and there are plenty of ways to do so in these colors. And of course, on top of that, this is a very heavy hitter. Again, 7/7, Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink. So yes, this is a very powerful commander, one that does cost a good amount of mana, but yeah, you're in green, so you got plenty of ways to ramp to get there. And of course, again, as I keep saying, this is a very powerful commander, and so are all the other ones in the A tier, but not quite to the S tier. So Phyrexia, congratulations on being the final A tier commander. So the S tier for Phyrexia all will be 1, and the precons is home to only one commander, and that is Unctus Grand Metatect. And this is the reason that all other commanders are barred from this tier, because this is incredibly powerful. A 2/4 Phyrexian Vidalcan that costs 1 blue that says, other blue creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes tapped, draw a card, then discard a card. Other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1, and by paying a Phyrexian blue until end of turn, target creature you control becomes a blue artifact. In addition to other colors and types, activate only as a sorcery. So let's say low to the ground commander with an absurd trigger. Anytime one of your blue creatures becomes tapped, you loot every single time. And there are a few ways that you can very easily go infinite with this, as early as, well, turn 2 or 3 most likely. But yeah, a Phyto Alchemist is one of them. Just get that down, get this down, and suddenly your deck is gone. Your library is gone. You can win things like Thassa's Oracle, or, Jace Wielder Mysteries, or, Lab Maniac. There are other ways to win as well, like a Psychosis Crawler, just by drawing enough cards to drain your opponents out. There are multiple ways to go infinite with this quite easily, and this just overall is a very ridiculous effect. It's an absurd amount of value, and there are even more ways to take advantage of that value. And that's not even saying that, of course, you can utilize artifact creatures, make them into blue creatures so that they can become a part of this as well. And also with that ability, you can also just utilize it as many times as you want in a turn. So you even might be able to take opponents out with a life swapping effect like a Soul Conduit. So yeah, there's a lot of potential for this commander. It is quite ridiculous. And in my opinion, it is just leagues above the rest of the commanders from this set and the precons. So Unctus, you have a ton of potential, and in my opinion, that is why you are an S tier commander, and no other commanders in this set in the precons can measure up to you. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so yeah, let me know what your thoughts are on it in the comments below, and of course, as always, thanks again, and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.